I'm good.
Great.
So we have called this meeting to order for the Forest Health Council Legislative Committee. I am Chair Commissioner Shattuck McNally, and let's do roll call.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to run down the roll. Samantha Albert.
Present.
Christy Belton.
I'm here.
Commissioner Hillary Cooper. Pat Dorsey.
Here.
Director Matt McCombs. Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally.
Here.
Mark Morgan.
Here.
Julie Stitzel.
Here.
And Sylvan Whiteskunk. So we do have 6 members, and that makes quorum.
Wonderful. Can we have a motion to approve the minutes, or did anybody have any additions or changes?
I don't think I got them.
It was attached to the last email that went out yesterday, or was it yesterday or the day before?
I think it was yesterday around lunch. Christy, I can make sure you're
Okay.
you're on that, and I can send it again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I can look again.
Did anyone else have any other changes or additions?
I can move to approve
Okay.
if there's no additions.
I'd second.
A second? Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay, that passes. We have those minutes approved. So let's move on to our next agenda item, which would be talking about old business, answer questions to the current legislation from last spring. And thank you, Courtney, for bringing that memo. Do we want to pull it up on the screen so folks who hadn't maybe seen it yet can look at it?
Yes, I will do that. And I'm wondering who hopped on the phone, just so I can update the roll.
This is Selwyn Whiteskunk. You tried.
Great.
Wonderful.
So,
Welcome so much for coming.
I haven't been. I just got reelected back to council about 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've been away for at least a month and a half. Thank you.
Thank you. We're happy to have you here.
Happy to get caught up and go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll just kind of give some background or some preference, context about what we're talking about. We have priority to have Senate Bill 5 out of the Forest House Council and Legislative Committee recommendations. And that bill had some attachments for co-swap funding, and we realized there was several avenues that had some co-swap funding in this legislative session. So we're having a discussion about what's the best strategy to make sure that this bill is successful and has the right pieces in it. So Courtney, do you want to lead that discussion?
I'd be happy to share at least like the Department of Natural Resources perspective on, like where we're seeking money and where our priorities are. I feel like that's the part of the discussion it's appropriate for me to lead, and then I think the council can have a further discussion, or this committee, about if it wants to like perfectly align with what DNR is doing, or if it wants to make slightly different priorities. So in the memo, I've listed the 3 potential funding sources. The first is through a severance tax allocation, and this is going to be $5 million ongoing annual cash fund appropriation with an additional 5 million coming in this year for a total of 10 million for fiscal year 22-23. And Daphne, correct me if I'm wrong about this. So I think it's just 10 million this year and 5 from here on out. And that funding is quite secure. I think the last step is just for the governor to sign it, but it's like made it through all of the other processes. And as part of the governor's budget, that's something that DNR supports. The second sort of avenue for funding is through the governor's wildfire investment package. So this includes $2 million in one-time funding for COSWAP. It also includes funding for the Department of Public Safety and the Colorado State Forest Service. Because this is also part of the governor's budget, DNR supports this funding request. I think it's because we already have the severance tax essentially secure, like the Department of Natural Resources feels like very grateful for that funding for COSWAP. And so we're definitely supporting, item number 2 also. But I think we feel secure in item number 1. And so there's like confidence that COSWAP will be continuing on as a permanent program through that. And then the third item on the list is the workforce development bill, which this committee's been working so hard on, and it includes the 1 million ongoing funding for COSWAP. And because this is not a part of the governor's budget, DNR does not have an official stance on this bill. And so I can't really say more than that about it. I know that any funding that COSWAP receives, it will put to get good use and it will put into projects across the state, but DNR doesn't have it. DNR isn't like advocating for this funding or isn't going to be like testifying in support of it. So if you guys have any more questions about DNR's stance on the bills, I can answer them, and Daphne probably can too. And Daphne, let me know if I misrepresented any of
If you
those.
have any questions, raise your hand. I have one. Of the severance, number 1, the severance, the 5 million is one-time funding, and the other 5 million would be ongoing cash appropriation for the program. Is it 5 million, or is there something built into maybe 5-10 years that it increases with the cost of labor or materials, things like that?
From my understanding, there is no built-in increase over time.
Thank you. That's helpful. Anyone else have a question?
Looks like Mark's raising his hand.
Oh, sorry, it doesn't pop up. Go ahead, Mark.
That's all right. I was just, I think I need to get educated a little bit better here. I need to know a little bit more. So of this $10 million funding from the severance tax for COSWAP, what exactly does that fund that you're supporting? I guess I'm looking for any overlaps in these 3 funding sources here. It seems like we have a 10 million, and then we have the 9 million that I think would be for the State Forest Service and their programs that they need. And then we have the 1 million for the things that we've been working on. What exactly is the initial 10 million for COSWAP going to? I'm kind of curious about that.
Mm-hmm. So the appropriation will move 10 million into the Wildfire Mitigation Capacity Development Fund, which was the original fund set up after the 2021 legislative session that created what would then become COSWAP. And so there are a few different allowable activities within that fund. The main ones are the Workforce Development Grant, where COSWAP awards crew time either from the Youth Corps or from the Department of Corrections Swift Crews. So that's like one of the COSWAP programs that's been very successful and people really enjoy. And then the other one is the Landscape Resilience Investment Program. And this is a different program within COSWAP where Cash grants, large cash grants up to $1 million are awarded to do landscape scale wildfire mitigation and planning. And so the $10 million will go into the fund, and the Department of Natural Resources is able to use that funding for any activities outlined in the Wildfire Mitigation Capacity Development Fund. The staff at DNR have not made programmatic decisions about which of these programs it will put that 10 million into, if it'll split it up equally. We're sort of directed to not like plan on the money until it's been, like signed by the governor. So we haven't been doing any planning for that 10 million. I think, the closer we get, we'll start having conversations about how we want it to be implemented. But for now, that information, we haven't even had those discussions.
Could you be a little bit more specific or beat it into my thick head? So exactly on the workforce development portion of that funding source number one, that would be for co-swap grants or for?
It would be for co-swap grants, yes.
So there would be no other uses of that money for other workforce development?
It would not be put, I guess I can't speak in absolutes. I would say there's a almost 100% chance it will go to co-swap grants. I can't say for sure they will only go to the workforce development grants. There's a chance they also go to the landscape scale projects.
I understand that, but I guess I'm wondering how narrow are the workforce?
It won't ever go to, this 10 million will not go to community colleges. The 10 million will not go to educational materials for high school students.
So it's pretty much a straight pipeline to co-swap.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Commissioner Cooper has her hand raised.
Well, I just took it down. I was just going to suggest that, at some point once this passes, I feel like our charge is to be advising DNR or providing recommendations on how this funding is spent, how it's prioritized, especially with wildfire resilience and forest health. So I think this is a real opportunity. Obviously, we're not going to spend the money before we have it in the bank. But I think there is an opportunity for us to maybe at our meetings this summer, really look at all the programs out there, opportunities out there, and help the state prioritize spending for wildfire resilient and healthy forest landscapes. So yeah, we can't do that now because these bills are the bills. And but in the future, I hope that we will be able to do that.
Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Cooper. I had a question, unless someone else has their hand raised. I can't see your faces on the four others, like Director McCombs and Pat. So you'll have to raise your hand because I can't see your faces on my screen. So the other fiscal note attached to Senate Bill 5, how much is that to go for the development? What's the fiscal note? And did they break it out? How much went to the existing versus to the two new?
I can look into that a little more. I think it might have been 1.2 million to the Department of Higher Education, but that might have been for the internships. I can open up the fiscal note real quick. Director McCombs might know also.
Director McCombs, do you know?
I wasn't paying attention.
Daphne?
I'm monstrously multitasking this morning in prep for another meeting. What was the question about something 5?
I was asking the other fiscal note. We were talking about the 1 million for the co-swap in this bill, but now we're talking about, I had a question about the fiscal note for the other portion of the bill for the internships. And then I was trying to remember the details. Did they say how much went to the one existing or the two new, or what?
Right. Yeah, I'd have to pull that breakdown up, and I can do that here in the short term. But
I've got it pulled up, Director McCombs, if you'd like me to jump in here, but let me know.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Go for it, Daphne. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne.
No worries. So, and I don't know if this is the level of detail you're looking for, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, but it looks like the internship portion of the bill is going to receive $75,000 in fiscal year 23-24 and in 24-25. It does not break out how much of that is going to new programs versus existing. The other components of the funding include $15,000 for the educational materials, and then through the Department of Higher Ed, there's $250,000 for the Wildland Fire Educator Program, and then about $1,080,000 for new and expanded forestry programs, and then $100,000 for the forestry harvesting simulator.
That's helpful. I'm just not sure I caught that. How much was for the existing program, forestry program?
So there's just one bucket for both the new and expanded programs, and that's just over $1 million. It doesn't break out how much of that is going to new versus existing.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Daphne.
I think that
Okay, so
I think for the bill, just
go
for
ahead,
clarity,
Director Hunt.
leaves that discretion to the awarding entity. So, I think it gives the board an opportunity to surge where they think the highest and best use might be, either expanding existing or establishing new.
Thank you, Director McCombs.
And actually, I apologize. There's a little bit more detail later on in the fiscal note. So it says $250,000 per year would go to expanding a program at a community college. And then $770,000 to a new program. And an additional $60,000 per year fuel mitigation and wildland fire certificate at the Colorado Mountain College. I do want to just confirm that this has been updated per the amended bill, because I know that we removed the CMC, but all of that is to say that there is actually a breakout between the new and existing.
And where would, and it doesn't, so it would not specify where the certificate money goes?
The copy I am looking at does, but I don't think that this has been updated since the amendment passed. Sometimes it takes a while to do an updated fiscal note.
Thank you, Daphne. So let's go back to the COSOP funding discussion and what we were presented, because that was what the discussion we wanted to have today. Do we need to recommend that not be a part of the bill to help with the fiscal note, since was not in the budget? Or do we want to stay with that recommendation, or knowing that we have the 10 million and then what was the other one? 9 million or 2 million for the COSWAP?
So the other amount is, $2 million in the governor's wildfire investment package for COSWAP.
Commissioner Cooper.
I think I would prefer to defer to staff. I mean, I like things nice and tidy and inbox and streamlined as much as possible, which is weird that I work in government. But so I would prefer Senate Bill 5 to run through the COSWAP program. However, I've heard that DNR is not really interested in pairing those programs, and it may be a little too late to do that. Although I will say that I was part of the team that was working on the 10 million into COSWAP last year in that legislation, and we were able to do that at the last minute. But I guess my bottom line is I just defer to staff, defer to the agency. If they feel like this funding, these programs should run through COSWAP, great. If they feel like it needs to be separate, it's a really small amount of money. Maybe it's sort of a pilot, see how it goes. And then, we could work on potentially more funding later, or some kind of merger if that needs to be done legislatively, if it can be done administratively, I don't know. But I don't feel like making a strong recommendation from this group at this point.
Christy has her hand raised.
I have a question. I'm a little maybe just behind here in understanding. So did I hear earlier that the funds that are allocated for COSWAP would not be used for this workforce gap that we have?
So the COSWAP program, I think, targets a very specific section of the gap. So there's like the gap is so big. There's like the education, and there's getting the experience, and then there's getting people into like agencies, and so the COSWAP grants really focus on getting people like first experience. And so it's like the first experience in a supportive environment where they can learn. So like the youth corps, young adults are like passing through the youth corps association, working on COSWAP projects. It's like a really supportive learning environment. And then the Department of Corrections Swift Crews, these incarcerated men are getting the chance to like work on a crew for the first time, gain that like important first experience. So I would say COSWAP is working on the workforce development issue, like in its specific section of the problem. And then like Senate Bill 5 is trying to address, the whole problem also. Like, let's talk to the high schoolers, let's get people in community college, let's get the certificates, let's get them experience, which is like the COSWAP part. So I hope that clarifies that COSWAP is working on the issue, but just a certain portion of it.
So then this seems like $1 million for workforce development seems fairly low. Is that really going to do much to help, fill this gap? Because it seems like we as a group identified the workforce development as being one of our biggest issues. And it seems like a low number to me, but again, I'm kind of, naive with all of this stuff. And I don't want to, we're getting money, and so I don't want to complain, but it seems low.
So can I just ask a clarifying question for your question, Chrissy? There's the workforce bill development has what, $1.5 million total? And then we had the $1 million for the COSWAP on top of it.
Okay.
And so the $1 million is on top of it, that would be going just for COSWAP funding to help support what Courtney just shared, is what we're talking. But the other $1.5 million, I think that's the number. It would be attached to this bill to help with the high school guidance resources, the internships or the supporting, and then expanding the new and existing programs. Am I correct that Courtney?
Yeah, I'd say that's correct, Jody.
Does that help, Christy?
It does. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not complaining because, we're making some progress. Not at all. Thank you.
I agree with you. It does seem like it low for those programs to get to expand and get people through. So Mr. Morgan, and then Samantha, I believe, had her hand.
Christy, I agree with you. I think it's low, but I also think it's a beginning point. And I think if we can get a program started and show the worth of that program, I think that's critical. I think I have a slight prejudice on the COSWAP programs. I think they're important, but I've also had multiple people that participated in those programs apply for work later, and they have not been the quality of candidates that I've seen from other sources. So in hopes maybe we can improve COSWAP as well, I would like to try some other avenues. I'm not negative on COSWAP. I just think that we need a dual path here. And that's what I was working for. And obviously when the path that you think is positive is not being funded as heavily. You're a little disappointed, but I'm also very happy for the support of this group. And if we can take what we get and make something out of it and show them that it works, then that's the way to go with it, I guess. So, but I agree with what your assessment is, but there's other people that run these programs and run these departments, and they know what their needs are, and they know what they need to try to get done. So I have to defer to that. And thank you guys for the help we are getting.
So Samantha asks if there's data to explain the need for how much it would take from those to start a new one or to expand the current one. Did I get that correct, Samantha?
Yeah, pretty much. I just was curious, Courtney, if there was a specific dollar figure. I know sometimes when you ask for something, it's lower, and I would hate for that low ask to be a barrier to future asks, if that makes sense. So just curious if you guys have a figure.
I don't think we put together a figure for like what the gap in the whole workforce development need really is. I know the State Forest Service has had this incredible number of like the amount of mitigation work or the amount of forest health projects that need to be done in the state, and that's a giant number. And I don't think we have like a smaller one around COSWAP or around developing the programs. And perhaps the people who are working on the fiscal note did a little research there, working with the universities or two-year institutions, but I don't think that got trickled down to us.
I think part of the stakeholder group, there was some consultation with Front Range Community College, I believe, with the Senator Cutter's group. And I think she inquired about how much that would take. And I think she did have some conversations with Community Mountain College, or her staff did, from what I remember from the stakeholder meeting. Does that help? So, and I also want to make sure we're clear, the Senate Bill 5, that funding and that how that money is going to be going out to what institution is going through the College Board, and with consultation or information from the state forester. Just if I just want to make sure that's correct and that we understood that, and that the COSWAP's the different lane. Yes. Mr. Morgan.
Just in answer to the previous question, I had some discussions with Front Range Community College on what their actual funding needs were, and it was about $250,000 for an additional faculty position. They could use immediately $60,000 in operating budget, and then it would take about $120,000 to expand their wildfire fire.
Mr. Morgan froze. Mr. Morgan, can I have you pause for a moment? I'm going to just let Daphne speak real quick because she has to leave in about 1 minute. And I'm going to see if she had anything else she wanted to add about any of the other current bills that we've been kind of monitoring. And then we'll come back to you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Just real quick, I thought it'd be helpful to provide an update on the bills that you all are tracking. Sorry.
Mr. Morgan, we're going to have you pause just for a second so we can talk to Daphne before she leaves.
Okay, so just real quick, House Bill 1018 is the timber industry workforce bill. If you recall, it was duplicative of Senate Bill 5, so that has been resolved, and all that remains in that bill is the income tax credit that's available for timber industry and wildfire related equipment. And so that passed out of the House Finance Committee, its second committee hearing unanimously yesterday. It looks like it's on a good track for passage. So just wanted to let you know that that one is moving forward. I also mentioned House Bill 1069 we met, which is the study on using biochar in the plugging of oil and gas wells. That one did pass through its first committee hearing, and a strike below amendment was adopted to pretty much streamline the research that is directed through the bill to have it go directly to an institution of higher education with a smaller advisory group that's weighing in throughout the process. So that strike below was adopted and it passed as amended. I think you all already know this, but Senate Bill 5 and House Bill 1060, the tree nursery bill, are both waiting for hearings in the House in the Senate and House Appropriations Committee. And that is likely to happen after the long bill. So we've got a couple of weeks before those move forward. Senate Bill 139 that we just discussed, I think Courtney mentioned this, but it did pass both chambers. It's just waiting for the governor's signature at this point. And then I was also just going to quickly mention a couple of new bills in the wildfire space, not so much in the forest health space, but just in case you guys are interested. Senate Bill 166 is the bill that will establish a wildland urban interface code board to develop a minimum building code for high-risk areas of the state. So that one just got introduced this week. And then Senate Bill 161 authorizes the state to purchase another Firehawk helicopter, or that's basically a military Black Hawk helicopter that's been retrofitted for firefighting. So that bill authorizes funding for that purpose if we can find one of those helicopters at a reasonable price. So that's all I've got. Let me know if you've got any questions, but otherwise I will hop off.
Commissioner Cooper has her hand raised.
Just a really quick one. Daphne is also hard at work on a very promising bill that is going to hopefully create more opportunity for stream restoration projects. That's a direct forest health nexus, and I hope that we can keep that one on our agenda, and I certainly hope we will be able to come to unanimous support to support DNR on that one, because I think it's a really important bill and it does get to that forest health thing that I hope that we will continue to talk about.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Cooper. And we're on track to introduce that bill in mid-March. So a couple more weeks, and would love to share more about that once it is introduced.
Thank you, Daphne. We'll let you get rolling because I know you're on a tight time schedule.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Okay. So Mr. Morgan, you had started adding some numbers up when you were talking and we kind of froze, but you said 120,000 to expand the program and 60,000?
I will start again, try to make it very brief. I think they were going to add a faculty position and everything that went with it. And I thought that was around 250,000. They had pretty good uses for about 60,000 in direct operating budgets, transportation, supplies. And then they already have a certificate program and a training program in wildfire. But they thought that the need was there to expand that, but that would take about 120,000 in additional investment. And as I heard the question earlier, you guys were kind of searching for hard numbers for the program. That's what I was trying to provide for you. And I'd have these discussions earlier so that you guys can get a good idea of what we're talking about for money wise. And that was numbers that I got from Front Range Community College that I worked on for the last couple of years. So I think they're fairly close. And they would be happy to provide an actual list of what their funding purposes would go for. But then they felt like that if this bill becomes reality and the funding is there, then they, as I understand it, would make that proposal to the reviewing agency, which would be the State Forest Service, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Say the last question again.
Yeah.
I said that if this bill goes through as written, that the reviewing agency would review how that money is funded,
Yes.
and that would be the State Forest Service.
Yeah.
They could make that they could make that detailed presentation to this group, or they could make it to the State Forest Service if this became a reality, which I thought was the proper process.
Yeah, we're like the advisory body for the board. And
Exactly.
of course, anything that we would provide as far as feedback, to the extent the process would allow, would be aligned with this group's awareness and feedback.
They felt that the big needs that you have, that this group has identified and everything, was for additional training for firefighters, which they do some, and they would expand that program as a portion. That's how they would use 120,000 of it, if that's what was wanted by you people. So
Gotcha.
I hope that just gives you some information.
That's
That's
helpful.
Thanks.
So do we feel the wording or the wording of the bill actually gives actual appropriate funding to that program at Front Range if they are so picked to expand? Or is it enough for the forestry, or is it just specifically going towards the wildfire? Because I thought I heard 120 or towards the
250,000 would be the overall faculty position to expand their program. And then in addition to that, if you wanted them to expand their fire program, which they would be happy to do, it would take about 120,000 additional. And so they expected, if this bill gets funded, what I have heard so far in this group was that they should be prepared to compete for that funding to expand their program, and the reviewing agency, one of them, would be with the State Forest Service. Am I incorrect in that?
That the funding would, are you incorrect that the State Forest Service? So again, that last question it's not computing. So one more time.
Okay. I thought as I read the bill that you would, the State Forest Service and other agencies would review the applications for the money under this bill. Is that not correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we're like the consulting
Okay.
agency.
So they felt that they were prepared to show the merit of their program and compete for that funding.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, I thought that was the correct pathway.
Yeah.
And I think we were all in agreement with that. And I think a little confusion got in because Commissioner Cooper, who had to leave a few minutes ago, she had suggested she wanted to go all through COSWAP. Is that what she was saying? Is that kind of why it got a little confusion there? I'm not sure. Remember, she said her question said she wanted it all to go through COSWAP. Is that the million or the whole program? Or I was trying to understand her question, but she's not here I was going to ask her to clarify that, but she's not here.
Yeah. This came up in committee, as I recall. So I don't think I think the funding, a portion of the funding based on the fiscal note goes to the Board of Community Colleges, and they make the determination on where that program expansion piece goes. The allocation for COSWAP in the fiscal note, as I recall, is essentially just a plus up for the workforce development component of COSWAP. So the DOC and Conservation Corps crew funding for fuels treatment, which is both a fuels treatment objective and a workforce development objective.
Thank you. I think it gets complicated when we get a lot of people adding things and changing sometimes.
Correct.
So I'll go back to kind of why we had this discussion in the first place. We had the discussion last meeting that it was important for us to discuss. Maybe it was prudent or maybe strategic to not have that COSWAP funding attached to this and make that recommendation, knowing that we had these other two funding streams that looks like one is in perpetuity and the other one is kind of a big boost to that program. Am I correct on that?
So you're asking, does this group want to make a recommendation to the council to eliminate that portion of funding, acknowledging there's other funding streams that look more certain or have a better chance of passing? Was that
Well,
what you're saying?
the reason we put this on this agenda is we had some concerns or thoughts or wonderings about there was all this different funding, and we wanted to have an overview about all the different funding pathways for COSWAP that maybe that Bill sponsored and everyone wasn't really aware of. And so we were wondering if we should keep that, recommend not having it, since there's not in the budget and it have to go through appropriations, and the other money would be directly in for the workforce development and not COSWAP. So I'm just curious what everyone's thoughts are on. Am I being clear? Mr. Morgan?
Yes, I have mixed emotions here, but I think that I would like to keep the bill separate and not under COSWAP. And because for this reason, the more layers, the more things can be redirected. And the more we have identified what we feel is a need, and I would like to be as specific as possible. I want to be as successful as possible. And if you make the case to me that we're going to be more successful putting it under COSWAP, fine, I'll listen. But at this point right now, from what I've seen, COSWAP is going to get quite a bit of adequate funding. And I would like to develop an alternate source for other types of workforce development. And sometimes if you get a big program that's already steaming along but they're not getting exactly the product that you want, a little competition from an alternate route to me sometimes is a good thing. So just on the surface.
Let me be clear. There's the workforce portion of the 1.5, and then there's this additional 1 million attached for going into COSWAP to keep COSWAP funded. So there's two things. So I'm wondering if we were concerned last meeting that maybe we need to not have the 1 million for COSWAP and kind of take that out and keep the 1.5 just focusing on funding this workforce program expansion. Go ahead.
I think we have people here in this meeting right now who have better knowledge than I about how to be successful. I've tried to be as transparent as I can possibly be, that we need to develop a workforce through our high schools and junior colleges and any other trade groups that we can get the job done. And I want to be successful, and I want these people to have a chance to show what they can do. And I'm open to suggestions. I know where I'm trying to get, and I'm thinking that Courtney and Samantha and Director McCombs have way more knowledge than I do on how to navigate these waters, but I know where I want to get. And so that's as plain and honest as I can be about it.
No, I think we're clear on that. We support that. And I think that's the main backbone of the bill. We're just talking about this 1 million for the COSWAP.
If you had money, I'm sorry.
Director McCombs, can you maybe help me?
Sure. I'm trying to think about how do you frame this, right? So the group could move forward if you so chose, and I would just be completely transparent that I would likely abstain from any vote in this regard, acknowledging, I don't have the context on sort of where some of the leadership in DNR sits on the topic, but I can say that if you could frame things in this way that said, if that $1 million was the difference between the rest of the bill moving forward, that this group would be comfortable having it struck a committee. You could say that, right? That could be a sense of the council. If you felt strongly that this is a threat to the overarching bill passing, you could certainly say, we recommend striking that component, with the rationale being we feel that COSWAP will be effectively funded through other mechanisms. But those are the two ways I think you could frame for the council to consider, which would be, if something's got to go, this is first. Because we feel comfortable elsewhere, or we feel so strongly that it's a potential drag on the overarching message of the bill, which is really to improve and expand, academic pursuits in short or that are accessible, affordable, and rapidly turn people around and into the workforce. We could move forward with a recommendation as well. But again, I think, and then the alternative is to Mark's point that we could sort of let the process work its will, and the agencies can sort of work behind the scenes with sponsors and others to ensure that we move forward to the most effective and the most robust package possible as it relates to workforce development. Acknowledging this was a core position that the council took, and certainly something that was valuable to the interim committee.
That's
Good.
helpful.
Does that help, that framing?
Yeah, that helps framing, because I was trying to say the same thing, but I was trying to think, how do we word that to say, do we recommend cutting it now or provide options? So I see Samantha has her hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Director. That was definitely helpful. I admit I'm a little wrapped around the axle after this conversation, but I guess just a quick clarifying question. I know that we're talking about this because of the greater meeting we had with the full Forest Health Council. I can't remember, was the concern that the fear was that the bill was not going to pass because of this addition, because of what people had heard in talking with others, or was that fear just simply within the Forest Health Council? That's what I'm a little bit confused about. And I just don't know I can take a strong enough stance because I'm not quite sure what the feeling is out there about this particular bill.
I'm just trying to remember myself what was said in the hearing. So Courtney, is this continuous appropriated? This $1 million is a continuous appropriation, do you recall?
Yes, it would be.
So this was the one that, Senator Simpson at the kind of the tail end of testimony was like, I'm a little concerned about continuous $1 million funding, but we can look at that going forward. So there was a signal from one member, and there were heads nodding on committee. Anytime you ask for continuous appropriate funding out of the general fund, you're going to get some sideways looks from the General Assembly as appropriate. So there was some hesitancy at the tail end of the engagement between the panel and the members. So we can take that for what it's worth.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes, I guess what I heard in this meeting, and I guess the area of concern for me is, what would it take, or why wouldn't the agency come out in support of this bill, or what would it take to make that palatable to where they would? I guess when you said that you were going to be neutral on this, I'm going, the question that went right off my brain was why, and what does it take to change that?
Neutral would be, do I vote in this committee for striking funding for a program? I don't have we're going to have to talk about, I think, between the agencies, sort of what are the top priorities for the COSWAP funding mechanism so that we can effectively represent those back to this constituency and others. And so that'll be something we'll certainly, because as the budget process is narrowing, these questions are getting more targeted. So we got to be really clear about what the highest priorities are for funding. But I can also say that, these are requests that are outside the governor's budget, and that's a hard line that I'm going to do my best to walk.
I guess the thing
Nuts.
I think that this would be a good idea and we can support it. I guess that's where I'm trying to get.
Yeah, and I think on the workforce development side, in particular the funding for higher education, I don't think it'd be a problem, certainly for if there were further committee hearings for us to request to probably get support, right? At least from the Department of Higher Ed, and I would think very similar for but again, the budget is narrowing, and so we have to be very thoughtful about how we advocate in alignment with folks that have larger jurisdictional controls over this process.
Thanks, Director McCombs. Christy, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's taken me a little while to get up to speed this morning and understand this discussion, but But I want to go back to what I said a couple of weeks ago. In my mind, it seems like as a group, overall Forest Health Council, we prioritized workforce development, and I would like to keep that front and center for us. It seems to me that if we rolled it into something else, or if the focus shifted to something else, or some other type of funding, then we maybe lose that focus and it just sort of, falls by the wayside. We identified it as, a huge priority, and I would like to stick with that.
Thank you, Christy. So I have a suggestion. So I know we're running out of time and I want to kind of on everyone's time. Do we, as a legislative council, make a suggestion? Because it is kind of getting late in the process with the appropriations coming up and hearing, and it's kind of already had 2 amendments, that we send a signal to the sponsors or to the Forest Health Council, our recommendations with this report that we want to generate from this discussion, that if going forward this bill, there's questions or concerns about that $1 million for COSWAP funding, that we recommend that could go, if it needs to go, to keep the rest of the bill going forward and intact going forward, to focus on that workforce development expansion. Julie.
Yeah, I think that the way you just framed that, and I'm with Christy, I've been kind of following along, making sure I'm really getting my mind around this. I like the way you just said that. I think that keeps the focus where the committee and the larger council has indicated it needs to be, and sends that signal that that's really our focus, right? If I'm tracking this morning, what I'm hearing is, for example, thank you, Mr. Morgan, because the information you shared from the higher education groups was helpful in my mind, because what I think I heard them say is that's what they need to make the expansion, right? That's what they need to get out of the gate, compete for it, and do the things to show they can be successful. I hear the concern about ongoing funding, and I'm saying to myself, I don't know a whole lot about how higher education sort of keeps the ball rolling once they get that initial funding, but it strikes me that I don't think they're counting on continuous funding year over year. They're counting on the funding to get it up and going, and then they will make it self-sustaining. I am assuming, so I hope that's right. So I like the way we've talked about this today and how we're moving it forward, because I think if we're giving higher ed and the high schools the tools they need to get this off the ground, I have every confidence that if they have what they need to get it off the ground, they will make it successful. And then that will bring the candidates and the sort of the competition and the other things that I'm hearing we continue to need. So I'm in favor of that recommendation.
Any further discussion on that?
I just want to say that that's a fair statement, Julie. I think, FRCC in particular, their argument is that we don't have we can't hire this additional capacity to offer this additional programming. And yet we believe firmly that there's more students wanting to participate. They're just locked out because of the limited offering. And so if the offering is increased, then more students then participate. The more students participate, the more tuition is gathered. The more tuition is gathered, the more sustainable the program is. So there is a logical argument. But there's a tiny bit of build it and they will come as well, because they don't have data on who they turn away. So demand is hard to measure, which is I think why the thoughtful investment, the initial investment approach that we're taking to this concept is a reasonable one, so that we can stand up to the scrutiny and skepticism about some of that approach.
And I'll just share. I chaired or judged the Boys and Girls Clubs of Limerick County Youth of the Year competition last weekend. And they had a student panel of students who were in Front Range Community College and CSU and certain programs and their challenges or barriers to getting into their non-traditional students for sure. And the one gentleman was actually in that forestry program trying to get his certificate, and he was really excited and sharing what a great program it was. And I was like, yay. That was great to hear from him, because he was talking to a room full of youth and families about, all these careers. And so I thought that was a great opportunity to talk about this career and the pathways for it. So it was pretty exciting. So we have that recommendation. Does everyone feel comfortable with that? Mr. Morgan?
I'm comfortable with it. I should go this way.
Okay, I see Pat. All right, so I just need a motion to approve that recommendation and to add that onto a report to send to the Full Force Health Council.
I would so move.
I would
A
second.
second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Is that things, Courtney, I think we pretty much went through the whole agenda in one swoop.
Yeah, let me look through it real quick. Yeah, I think that was the main topic for discussion.
So how about Courtney, I work on a short, brief report that the Full Force Health Council asked us to kind of report back to them about our discussions. And we'll send it out to everyone to see before we forward it to the full council. And unless you have major objections or feel like something's missing, you can let Courtney know and we can get that to them in a timely manner. Is that okay?
I just want to
Great.
closing thought, and I got to run. I think one of the things that I'm learning right now is that we need to come into these dialogues a little bit better prepared to have some of these harder conversations about taking positions on legislation that's rapidly moving through a process and changing relatively dynamically, right? So I just want y'all to know that we've got some capacity coming on board here at the State Forest Service on policy and ledge affairs, as well as I think that Courtney and I'm going to make sure that we reach out and have some more dialogue in advance so that we can be a little bit more positional for you, so it doesn't feel like we're being squishy, because I know that drives people nuts. But there's just a lot around all of this right now that is, challenging and complex. And so we'll do a better job of coming in with some stronger sort of thought processes refined, so that when you ask these tough questions in real time, we can respond in real time. And so I'm speaking to Mark's comment about, like, why would you not take a position, Matt? This is going to help you. And because there's a lot of other things going on, and I want to make sure that I can represent those effectively without getting in trouble, so, which I'm okay getting in trouble too. I'm very effective at getting out of it. But I just wanted to put that out there for this team. We'll get better. But these conversations are so fruitful. This kind of recommendation is so valuable, and it sends a very clear signal to the Assembly as they consider these issues. So good job, everybody, working through a sticky and complicated discussion.
Thank you, Director McCombs. And I'm sorry I wasn't trying to be so clear. It was so hard to navigate what we were trying to fine tune to a direction. So I appreciate everyone's patience. Mr. Morgan.
Yes, Director McCombs, I think one thing that's really important here is this is very much a symbiotic relationship, and it's a dual path relationship. And the more we can learn about what your concerns are and what your issues are that you're facing as agencies, it has to come from both directions. And when we know what those are through that preparation, and then we know what the groups we represent, our problems are, then we can look for chances to make it work. But I think the more you educate us about what your issues are and what your roadblocks are, the more we can find ways to move this thing down the road a little bit. So I'd appreciate that a lot.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why I want to be able to come in and be very transparent and be very direct. But when you don't kind of know everything and things are in motion right underneath you, it's hard to sort of have those conversations in real time. I mean, I'd just be super candid about that. But we'll get better at it as we get more effective. And we'll do a little bit more prep. I'm just looking at Courtney, like we'll do a little bit more prep before we come into these sticky conversations so that we can be really clear and direct and have positions that you can respond to. That's all. I mean, we're just learning, still learning, but I think the recommendations that are coming out are very valuable to the deliberative process. So thanks everybody for your voices, and unfortunately I have to bounce as well. Have a
Yeah,
great
thank you.
weekend.
And thank you, Director Holmes, and thank you, Pat. I know she's ready to log off. So we'll work on that document and get that out to you. And then I think the next meeting we'll have agenda, just a legislative update and any other bills we need to kind of be hearing about. And then if there's a item coming up, I'll kind of add it to the agenda. If you have something you really want to talk about, let me know. We'll add it to the agenda. If not, we'll try to keep these a little bit briefer, since we're reading every 2 weeks. And yeah, thank you all for this interesting discussion today. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I would still move.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Thanks all.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.